case you're not aware, the library does a mission statement, which is to be an inclusive center for community engagement, knowledge, and personal enrichment. And I feel that tonight's program fits squarely in that mission. Our hope tonight is to share valuable information with the community and to be a resource for individuals who want to learn how to best prepare for potential natural disasters. And with the help of Transition Town Port Washington, we're also going to take a closer look at the bigger picture of what risks we as a waterfront community are facing and what steps can be taken to make our community more resilient to the increasing challenges posed by climate change. So in case you're not familiar with our co-sponsor tonight, Transition Town Port Washington is a community-based environmental organization working to address biodiversity loss and climate change with household and systemic solutions. They're engaged friends and neighbors who are working collectively to transform the Port Washington Peninsula into a sustainable and resilient community. So I want to take a moment just to thank Margaret Galbraith, who is the president of Transition Town Port Washington, for helping make this program possible, as well as Aaron Molyneux, another Transition Town board member who could not be here tonight. And again, as I said, just a quick reminder, this program will be repeated on Sunday at 3 p.m. In Spanish. So we have two presenters tonight. Here's just some quick background about them. David Jakim holds an MS in environmental geoscience and an MA in earth science education. He's been mapping the flora, fauna, and habitats of the Port Washington Peninsula with local nonprofit organizations for over a decade. He is also a board member of the Transition Town Port Washington. Some of you may have enjoyed David's presentation on Hempstead Harbor Woods here at the library back in April. We're very happy to be welcoming him back today to educate us about the rising risk we face as a waterfront peninsula and what steps can be taken to become more resilient. And we're also very glad to welcome Paul Merkelson, who is a founding board member of Transition Town Port Washington and longtime Port Washington resident. And I want to especially thank Paul for agreeing to step up in the last minute to help with tonight's presentation and explain how best to be prepared for a natural disaster. So as I said, we have a number of resources in the back to help yourself too. I'll also be putting those in the chat for those on Zoom. And we're ready to get started. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to David Jakeem.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to the Port Washington Public Library and Transition Town for hosting this event. Thank you all for coming out here. I commend you to take the opportunity to learn about climate change, sea level rise, and what that means for our community. I'd like to start by bringing our attention to Hurricane Sandy. So Hurricane Sandy hit Port Washington with an 11-foot storm surge that flooded large areas in our community. Here you can see there's West Shore Road along Manhasset Bay that flooded heavily with D1 in the background that you might know. This is Baxter Pond, and Baxter Pond was flooded heavily, and the seawater actually mixed with the fresh water of the pond, changing the pond's ecology. And then here's another look from across Manhasset Bay, and you can see the marina in the background. Here's another look at Hurricane Sandy and how it impacted our peninsula. You can see in the outline, all around the peninsula, those were areas directly impacted by Sandy. So again, Sandy hit the very northern tip of our peninsula with a storm surge of 11 feet, and then Manhasset Bay and Hempstead Harbor with a storm surge of 10 feet, flooding huge portions of our peninsula. Such a storm, when it occurred, is supposed to happen once every 400 years. At this point in time, we are reevaluating that time frame, so such a storm might happen now every 100 years. Later this century, we expect that such a storm might occur every 20 to 25 years. So within a mortgage cycle, within a generational cycle. However, there are things that we can do to enhance our resilience to future storms and sea level rise. I'd like to take a focus on the area in Port Washington, the community that was most affected by Hurricane Sandy. This area is Manhasset Isle and Manor Haven. Manhasset Isle, as you can see, is this patch of land that was surrounded by floodwaters. Manor Haven also was significantly flooded, as you can see in here. Here's the Manor Haven Beach Park. And also many of the basements in Manor Haven were flooded as well. Interestingly enough, there was one little island in the area that was not flooded. over at Growing Love Community Garden. It just happens to be a little bit higher elevation above the sea, so we have this island that was not impacted by the flood and salt water. So sea level rise can change abruptly, and it has over the last million years. In fact, over the last 500,000 years, we have seen 4 ice ages and four warm periods. The last ice age ended about 25,000 years ago, and we experienced a warming period that has driven sea level rise over the last, from about 25,000 years ago to about 8,000 years before present. So for the last 8,000 years, the sea level has remained constant. It hasn't changed. Our developments along the coastline have remained stable, and this is one of the reasons that people are not looking forward to the future in terms of sea level rise. We assume that our coastlines will continue to be stable, and in fact, that is not at all the case. Right now, in the last few decades, if you look on this graph, back to 1995, sea level was rising 2 millimeters per year. As of 2005, it's been rising at 3 millimeters per year, and as of 2015, 4.8 millimeters per year. So this is doubling, this is exponential growth, and we anticipate more doubling as we proceed into the future. I want to take a larger look at sea level rise from 1800 and then looking forward to 2100. Sea level has already risen 1 foot since 1800, and this has dramatic implications for our flooding events and also our tide cycles, as we will see. Within 30 years, we can expect as much as 2.5 feet of sea level rise. By 2100, we can expect up to 8 or 10 feet of sea level rise. The main drivers of sea level rise that we will see this century are the calving of Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. Slowly, due to global warming and warming of the ocean, these ice sheets are slowly slipping into the sea, into the ocean. And some of these single ice sheets carry multiple meters of sea level rise. Now, these ice sheets calving is unpredictable, so there's no way we can tell what our future sea level rise will be. As you can see, we based upon different scenarios of global warming and the uncertainty that we will experience, we can see by some estimates 1 foot to 8 feet of sea level rise. And looking at these different scenarios, it's critical that we plan for the highest sea level rise scenario. I also want to mention that to date and in the coming decades, the strongest driver of sea level rise has been ocean warming. And as the oceans warm, they expand and sea levels rise. And this is a secondary driver of sea level rise. So I'd like to discuss the 5 flood factors and look at the differences between these different flood factors to disentangle these terms. So first off, we have storm events like Hurricane Sandy, which we're expecting to become more frequent and severe as the decades pass. We have heavy rainfalls. One of the climate projections for New York is that we'll be experiencing much more extreme heavy rainfall events during short periods of time, particularly rainfall events of greater than 5 inches in a short period of time. These rainfall events lead to runoff. Water that rains falls onto the streets, and it runs into our basement. It runs into areas that flood. There is along Beach Park Road flooding in basements, as well as other parts of the peninsula. And the second to last factor is tides. Tidal cycles range multiple feet every year. And there are king tides every once a year or multiple times a year that have extreme fluctuations in sea level. Now, sea level is rising exponentially, and the process of sea level rise it's not linear. The impact that sea level rise will have on these events. As sea levels rise, all of these different flood factors rise with the sea level, and this causes exponentially more exposure and harm to our community. There has been a tremendous increase in coastal flood days in the last 2 decades. If we look back to the 50s through the 90s, we were looking at 10 or 15 flood days per year. Between 2005 and 2014, we see now about 40 flood days per year. So this is tripling, and this is due to small increments of sea level rise. The orange in this diagram represents sea level rise that can be attributed to human-induced sea level rise, and the blue represents events that we can have expected to occur naturally without any human impacts. I'd like to take a look at Port Washington with different levels of sea level rise. It's a little, so the Port Washington Peninsula, the iconic cow neck, you can see different parts of the peninsula, including East Creek, Half Moon Beach, the Hempstead Harbor Shoreline corridor. Around Manhasset Isle, again, these light blue areas are all areas that we can expect to flood with 3 feet of sea level rise without human intervention. With 8 feet of sea level rise, you can see a much more dramatic flooding around Manhasset Isle, also the Half Moon Beach and surrounding developments, along Hempstead Harbor Beach Park, and also in the inlets along Hempstead Harbor and Manhasset Bay. So 3 feet of sea level rise, which could happen by 2060, will necessitate shoreline protection. And that's what we're expecting all across the western coast of Long Island, including Port Washington. This map actually shows those areas that we can expect to receive coastal protection, which could include seawalls or natural barriers or different infrastructure that will prevent our rising seas from flooding our community. So almost all of Port Washington will be flooded, will be protected, except a few places will be flooded that are geographically and geological not suitable to coastal barriers. And we'll take a look at that shortly. Again, by establishing seawalls, we can look to 2060 when we'll have 3 feet of sea level rise. But if we look to 2100, we'll be able to plan farther into the future and not have to reconstruct our coastal barriers. So the sooner that we plan and the farther into the future that we plan, the more resilient our community will be to coastal disasters, and also the less money we will spend on protecting ourselves. And this will require intermunicipal and regional planning coordination. What we do in Port Washington also affects Great Neck, Glen Cove, and other parts of our region. I want to speak about our salt marshes and coastal habitats that are critical when it comes to mitigating floods and storm surges. Our salt marshes and coastal habitats can be looked at like barriers that slow down storm surge and prevent flooding along our peninsula. Our salt marshes and coastal habitats also clean up pollution, especially nitrogen pollution as it flows into the sea. They absorb this pollution and use it for the building of salt marsh grasses and the ecosystem. Salt marshes also support nurseries for many of our fish species. And in addition, as we move into the coming decades, our salt marshes we need to help them to migrate upland to keep pace with rising sea levels. A salt marsh can increase in elevation 1 millimeter per year based upon natural processes. But as we're expecting sea level rise right now, as we're seeing sea level rise of multiple millimeters per year, sea level is higher than the salt marshes can possibly migrate upland. So our salt marshes need assistance. And there's a number of places that we can do that around the Port Washington Peninsula, including the Hempstead Harbor Shoreline corridor. And this assistance will look like assisting our salt marshes to migrate upslope or uphill to keep pace with rising sea levels. Our salt marshes are also important for our fauna and most beloved animals, including our diamondback terrapin, which only inhabits brackish waters and estuaries, our river otter, our osprey, and at Sands Point and Half Moon Beach, we've seen the endangered piping plover, with only a few populations in our area. So this is an image, this is a map of the Port Washington Peninsula that I created in 2013, and then proceeded to explore most of these different habitats. All the different colors on this map represent different types of habitats, different biological communities that support different assemblages of species. We have hundreds of species of birds on the peninsula, many hundreds of species of plants, and they all occupy these different wild areas. So 80% of our peninsula has been developed. Of the remaining 20% of it, 10% is golf course and cultural areas, and the last 10% is wilderness. And also 70% of our coastline has been developed. So these remaining intact habitats and intact coastline are all the more critical for us to protect. I'd like to point out a few places of particular interest, especially with respect to sea level rise. One of them includes Leeds Pond Preserve and the Science Museum of Long Island. This area is managed for natural habitats, biodiversity, education purposes, and also, as you can see here, this little blue polygon is Leeds Pond, our largest pond on the peninsula, a 30-acre pond. And this area is engaged in a lot of progressive projects, like including oysters in Manhasset Bay to clean up pollution, protecting habitats, restoring habitats from invasive species, and they're very forward-thinking in terms of protecting and restoring their salt marshes. On the other side of the peninsula, we have the Hempstead Harbor Shoreline Corridor, which is our largest area of marsh that I aforementioned. We have East Creek, which is our largest estuary. And also another consideration, I mentioned development on the peninsula. One development that is proposed right now and that is going through proceedings with the town of North Hempstead is at 145 West Shore Road. And this is in a fairly intact habitat area that is connected to the larger habitat area along Hempstead Harbor. Hempstead Harbor hosts a 1,000-acre habitat area that I'm encircling, including the Hempstead Harbor Woods, and these habitats are interconnected. Our coastline and our large habitat area along the Hempstead Harbor Shoreline Corridor, making it all the more valuable for biodiversity, wildlife that needs such a large space to inhabit. In April, I gave a presentation on the Hempstead Harbor Woods, Port Washington's least known treasure. I highly recommend looking it up on the library website. There's a YouTube presentation that is very interesting. This is a look at Hempstead Harbor with 3 feet of sea level rise. I want to pay attention again to Hempstead Harbor. Here you can see the faint outline of salt marshes that have been lost due to, or that will be lost due to rising seas without human intervention. We have Mayor Newberger's Cove right here, which was the site of a salt marsh restoration in 2012. And then this is the Hempstead Harbor Beach Park right here. And you can see the faint outline of blue representing flooding throughout the area. And this area that I'm pointing out right here, this little corridor, is the Hempstead Harbor Beach Park, Bar Beach. So this is another area that's vulnerable to flooding. And if we're going to keep Bar Beach, we'll need different management actions so that we can continue to swim there. And the town of North Hempstead is on top of this. In 2019, they developed a Hempstead Harbor Beach Park Shoreline Master Plan. And this plan is planning far ahead into the future to address sea level rise and coastal storms. It involves riprap, and riprap is just a large layer of stones to buffer wave activity and protect the soil surface against erosion. And then next to that riprap is a tidal wetland. And so during king tides or high tides, some water will enter into the tidal wetland and support our salt marsh and coastal species. Finally, there's a large riprap area leading up to an esplanade that will be covered with native vegetation. So looking at the bigger picture in Port Washington, we need to take actions, prioritize our actions, and act soon to protect our coastal habitats, our ecology, and our community. So for ecological protection, we need to establish living shorelines wherever possible, like the precedent that's being set at Hempstead Harbor Beach Park. We need to assist our coastal habitat to migrate upslope, like at the Hempstead Harbor Shoreline Corridor. The investment of eco-restoration projects for future coastlines now will pay back in the future many-fold over with prevented expenses. And building protective barriers that will support our coastal habitats wherever possible. And also the establishment of plantings to reduce coastal erosion along Manhasset Bay. And here's a look across Manhasset Bay with a lot of area that has been eroded. And on the lower left-hand side is that salt marsh restoration along Mayor Newberger Cove. Now to look towards what we can do to protect our community from rising sea levels, what we can also do as individuals. So one of the most important things we can do is educate. We can share and teach in all forms for wider public understanding of this new reality and in the decades to come. I recommend that everybody assess your personal vulnerability, the vulnerability of your house, of your neighborhood. A good resource for exploring that is called Searching Seas Risk Finder. You can either type that into Google, or you can go to this website here, www.riskfinder.climatecentral.org. It takes a little bit of exploration to get a handle over how to use the website, but it's very informative about the particular geographic areas that will be impacted. We need to advocate and legislate to push for change and forward planning policies and intermunicipal cooperation sooner rather than later. We need to elevate our infrastructure and buildings that must remain where they are to reduce flooding. Those places that can be isolated from coastal flooding, we have the opportunity now to establish coastal barriers where we can, where geologically appropriate. There will be a need for people to relocate. And that means moving to higher ground, moving up elevation. And this includes not just people, but also our buildings and infrastructure. The future of our town in the coming decades and century will look a lot different than it does today. And it's critical that we plan for the worst case scenario. So to conclude, our future prospects are not entirely negative. We have the ability to plan now and also in the coming decades before sea level rise really begins to accelerate and impact our community. Trillions of dollars of assets and economic value will literally go underwater this century, not just in Port Washington, but around the globe. A comparable or even greater value can be created through the development or elevated buildings, infrastructure, transportation grids, and utilities. Adapting to the new climate condition requires developing new expertise. It requires our youth and future population to be involved in engineering, coastal planning, science, and community involvement. Our decision makers need to access and use the new data that's coming out, and that as we're learning more each decade about our future. We must move forth towards an intermunicipal plan for cooperation and for the worst case scenarios, not just the middle of the road scenarios, but for those critical disasters that we expect, like Hurricane Sandy. The sooner we act, the more opportunity we have to protect our coastline, and the more that we work together as a community and with other communities and Long Island, the better we will be able to adapt to our uncertain future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, David. We will take some questions here. Maybe Brian, if you can give us maybe just a little more light in the audience here. I do want to quickly mention something that David brought up, which is that number one, yes, David's Hempstead Harbor Woods talk is on the library's YouTube page. Just go to YouTube, search for Port Washington Library. You can find that talk here. We are also recording tonight's program. If you do speak to someone who wasn't able to be here, I know there's some other community events going on tonight. We are recording this, and this will also make its way to our library's YouTube page as well. So in terms of questions, again, if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll come around with the mic. You mentioned a lot of seawall infrastructure, sea barriers, and things like that. What are those? What are they going to look like? Where are they going to be? Just curious as to, are these gigantic cement walls? Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
So I'll revert back to the slide that we have with Hempstead Harbor Beach Park. Here we go. So there's different sorts of coastal protection for different geographic places. At this time, the most ecologically beneficial way of protecting our coastline is by establishing, protecting, restoring, and also supporting salt marshes into the future. As I mentioned, our salt marshes are the first line of defense during a storm surge. If there are no salt marshes and we cannot create new salt marshes, then there are different types of infrastructure that can be created. This includes riprap, which actually already exists around Hempstead Harbor Beach Park. If you go to the northern area, there are many large stones that have been placed down alongside of the corridor to prevent coastal erosion. This also, as you're familiar with, the town dock, those are vertical walls of cement in certain areas, and depending on how much time we have to adapt, those are important types of coastal protection. And there are also dikes that will actually prevent prevent sea level rise and stormwater from flowing into our critical habitats. There's also seawalls, actually, that are being proposed around New York City that, in the case of a major flood event, will actually close, and water will be the water will be routed elsewhere. In particular, in Port Washington, that is a potential future plan.
Okay, another question.
Yes. First, just compliments on this incredible font of information you've been giving us. It's really amazing, and I'm just curious about so many different terms. I never heard riprap before. What else? Calving that you mentioned at the beginning. But you know, this is just a general comment. But what I'm concerned about is development. You mentioned at the beginning that 80% of Port Washington is developed, and of the 20%, 10% are golf courses, I believe, and the other
golf courses, or cemeteries, or fields. Yes.
Right. Then there's all this pressure, economic pressure. You know, this is maybe something that's going to be addressed in the second half, but how do we get people behind? I mean, I'm fascinated by the idea that salt marshes can actually move upland.
Yes.
That, you know, they pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, so to speak. But how do we reconcile and really get people behind, you know, I guess an anti-development? I mean, like that new project that's being proposed, that we've seen signs all around, I think, thanks to Transition Town, about, you know.
Yes. You mean 145 West Shore Road right here?
developers from, where are they? Tennessee or someplace like that?
Right, actually, maybe Margaret could speak to that,
Yeah.
if you would. Just to the developers and where they come from.
I'm not sure. I don't want to be quoted. I think it's Tennessee,
Excuse-
but I think the main answer is to organize. There's a lot of neighborhood groups that are organizing. We Save Our Shoreline is a campaign of neighborhood groups and environmental groups. We encourage everybody to get involved because we should let our town representatives know that we don't want this and that we really want, a green corridor, that's what our town needs to survive these natural disasters, and we need biodiversity. So yes, so I would say organize, let your town officials know, and let other people know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Margaret is the director of Transition Town and also spearheading an initiative to keep an intact Hempstead Harbor shoreline. Yes.
So just to kind of sum up, I think the idea here, and David, you did a terrific job of presenting this, was before we get into the nuts and bolts, and Paul will be speaking about this shortly, what do I need to have in my home? What do I need to have as far as emergency supplies so that if and when that next, superstorm does, hit our region, we are prepared as individuals. You've taken us out a bit for a wider view of our peninsula as a waterfront community and shown us some of the particular risks that we have, being that we are right on the water, and that there are steps we can take, not just as individuals, but as a collective community, to become more resilient. And I think that's a lot of what you've been able to very clearly illustrate for us here tonight. Can you tell us, are there good examples of what other communities are doing? Are there other communities on Long Island or other coastal communities in the country that are taking a forward-looking approach to this?
So the most vulnerable areas on Long Island are those low-lying lands on the South Shore, the coastal beaches, Jamaica Bay, the Great South Bay. These areas were the most heavily impacted by Hurricane Sandy, and they're planning ahead for a future that is already coming in terms of sea level rise and coastal disasters. Yeah.
So I think of, for example, the city of Miami, which is already experiencing high tides that come up through the storm sewers, and they are in a real challenging situation, as it is, I think, a little bit of a look into the future for the rest of us.
Yeah, in particular in Miami and parts of Florida, as sea level is rising, it's also actually rising into their streets. They have limestone underground, which is permeable. So essentially, the water just goes right through the rock and floods their streets and infrastructure, and people are moving away from the coasts there right now.
Let me just check if we have any other questions here in the chat. Oh, nothing there. Okay, so we'll certainly take more questions at the end. I think we'll be ready now, I think, to turn things over to Paul for his section of the talk. So you just give us a moment while we bring up the next presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Another round of applause for David Jakeem. Great, and just, there we go. So there's a number of the handouts that are in the back are also going to be put into the chat right now. They relate directly to this next section of the presentation. So please welcome our next speaker.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, David. My friends in the park section, my friends and neighbors in the park section may wonder, well, this is all interesting, but we're like 100 feet above sea level, I think. Like, what does that have to do with us? Well, we're going to talk about what we need to do as individuals to be prepared for emergencies, and we're going to talk about how we need to establish connection and networks with our friends and neighbors in our immediate neighborhood. But having a resilient community, the environment is also very important. So there may be emergencies where we have to go down to Manor Haven or something. We may have friends there. We may need some kind of supplies or resources there. It's very hard to imagine what it could be, but as time goes on, we find that there are things that we don't need every day that may become very critical for us. So we'll talk more about that. But I'm also going to address a lot of the other risks and vulnerabilities that we could have. We need to think more broadly about this and be prepared. And I think that, we can stick our head in the sand. People would say, well, it can't happen here. That's Pakistan. That's not going to happen here. That's California. It's not going to happen here. So that's one cliche. It can't happen here. But the answer to that is basically what goes around comes around. So there are those of us who remember emergencies that we've had to deal with, like Superstorm Sandy. But even things that are really not widely known, like in the park section, the block next to the one I lived on, in an unnamed storm last year. This didn't even make the radar in terms of getting a name, but the rainfall was so heavy that 4 basements, basements in 4 houses on the block next to me flooded. Now, fortunately, no one was living and trapped down in those basements like people were in Queens who actually died during a previous storm, okay? So we really have to understand the importance of resilience as a whole community. So I'm Paul Merkelson. I'm not Erin Molyneux. This is an example of emergency preparedness in action. Erin had a family emergency, and his emergency prep plan became me. So, I'm not the original version, but I'm a reasonable facsimile thereof, and I will be able to address this. Now, I want to ask the audience here, how many of you have a go bag? Okay. So I feel confident in speaking to you. I'll tell you just a brief story. About 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of hiking, and I was doing winter hiking, and the Appalachian Mountain Club, which I'm a member of, had a winter first aid course and preparation. I said, I should do that because I like to go out by myself, and I really should know what to do in an emergency if I need to administer first aid to myself or I come upon some people that need help. And I just have to tell you that in the course, I was one of the few people that wasn't an emergency responder. And when we weren't like in the course and people were just chatting, they were chatting about, well, how much rope do you carry? I carry 50 feet. That's not necessary. 25 feet's enough. What do you do? 3-ply polypropylene? I would felt like I was completely over my head. So I'm happy to say that since all of you don't carry go bags, that I can probably, have some information that might be valuable to you. If you all had go bags, I might step back a little bit. Okay, so I want to also thank David. I want to thank Margaret and my colleagues at Transition Town and the Port Washington Public Library and Jeff Zay in particular. We've done a number of programs together, Transition Town and the library, and I think that this, in service to the community, to provide information and to make us a more cohesive and robust community. But I think that this subject is really core to what both organizations are about, providing resources to the community, but also helping build that community strength. So it's really, the Port Washington Library is a wonderful resource, and it's really a pleasure, and it's reassuring to have an organization like that in the community. And a lot of people take advantage of it, and I don't think we should take it for granted. So there's a couple of takeaways that we really want to get out of this. I think that the important thing is, what can we do to be better prepared ourselves? How do we build resilience in our community, in our neighborhoods? And how do we reach out to other people? I think those are the important things that really we need to talk about. So it's really about individual action, but it kind of goes up the ladder through the organizations, from community up through, the island-wide, state, local, national, global level. And I will talk a little bit more about that. So to start off with, here's a list of resources. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to look at all of them, but look at some of them. I took a look at the FEMA site, and there was some really interesting information there that I wasn't aware of. I kind of skimmed it, and I looked also at Town of North Hempstead's website. I'll try to look at others. I mean, I think that now that we're approaching hurricane season, it's always a time where, you know, just speaking for myself, I go, oh, I got to be more prepared. So I'm somewhat prepared. I actually have my backpack, my go bag with me, and I'm going to make an example of myself because I didn't change it. I didn't say, oh my God, I'm speaking. I can't look like I'm unprepared. So I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm going to show you and talk to you about what I have and use an example of myself because I'm in many ways just a typical person. I'm not really an expert in emergency preparedness. Nobody needs any particular expertise. You just need to inform yourself. You need to build your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities. And you know, you need to do what you need to do to protect yourself and your immediate family and you know, friends and neighbors, and be able to receive the aid that they may need to give you. That's the important thing. That's what being prepared is about. There's not one size fits all that an expert will tell us what to do. But there are some commonly accepted practices that we'll go over too. So take a look at that, build up your knowledge, build up your skills. So risks and vulnerabilities, this is where it starts. We need to first look at what we personally need as individuals to what are we at risk for. If you lack mobility, if you have a physical disability, you know, they may be specific to your own situation. It may be something about your housing that puts you a little bit more at risk than other people. You could live on the, you know, a low-lying area, so you're more at risk to storm surges and sea level rise. It's all different, but you need to evaluate that first. That's the first step. So what are the other vulnerabilities? David talked about the environment and the risk of sea level rise and how that can all affect us, even if we're not in one of those communities. But we could have individual health issues too, okay? And they may just affect us and not affect anyone else, but during a wider emergency, they could become more serious to deal with. And, you know, it's something that we have to just be aware of. What are we going to do? It may be medicines, and you just say, well, I need to have a little bit more medicine on hand if there's going to be an emergency. Our infrastructure in this country is not great. I think the American Society of Civil Engineers rates it a D. That's pretty bad. And a lot of our transportation systems are more than 100 years old. So we don't think about bridge collapses here, but, you know, heavy flooding could erode the road beds, and we could, you know, lack transportation to our ability to get to other places. So it's something that we really have to, you know, that could be a risk. Service disruptions, blackouts, we've experienced that. Climate change, resource depletion, supply chain disruptions. You know, maybe the supply chain disruptions were things like we couldn't get something on Amazon, or there were shortages of certain items. But, you know, it could be much more critical. It could be things that are life critical that we are not able to get, that we get from other places. War, terror, war, how could that affect us? Well, the war in Ukraine is affecting Europe in a major way. You know, Russia's cutting off gas, and there are other things that are happening. Let's not be complacent and say it can't happen here. We could be affected by events of civil unrest, hate crimes, random acts of violence. It's in the news a lot. What goes around comes around. So this shouldn't be depressing or meant to scare people. But if we're prepared, you know, I think we're in a better condition to deal with it. And we may lack critical information. So it's important to know our information sources. It's important to improve our own knowledge, skills, and abilities so we're better able to deal with these things. And we don't want to be in a situation where we're, you know, we can't always be self-reliant, so we need to establish those connections. Community resilience. I think this is a very key graphic here because it simply sums up the broad scope of what it requires to be more resilient. You know, certainly, and David addressed this, the environment is important and can't be taken for granted. And, you know, the things that David talked about that are happening and that have to happen to a greater degree are important. And we should support that. You're all early adopters because you came to this. So you need to spread the word and be aware of that to some degree. Economic resilience. So we're dependent on Amazon. Well, they defeated me. I really don't like using Amazon, but Jeff Bezos has beat me into the ground. I order things on Amazon, more than I want to, and I'm very dependent upon it. But they may not always be able to get the trucks in, or there may be a power outage and I can't order things on Amazon. I can't get, there may be other organizations that are headquartered in Chicago or London or someplace that we're dependent on, and in an emergency, they can't provide the resources. So economic resilience is about having those services available to us in the community. What does that mean we do as individuals? Well, we need to support local business. It's that simple. If they're not in business, then they're not there to support us. And I think we're vulnerable. Look at the vacancies on Main Street. If those were thriving businesses that supported the community, I, for one, would feel a lot more secure. But that's a sign of risk, I believe. And it also includes supporting local workers, local tradespeople, electricians, plumbers, people that we need in an emergency. That's important. We can't just get that as a service that comes in from the outside. In an emergency, we can't depend on it. And probably the most important thing for us here as a group, as individuals, is the social resilience. So it starts with us as individuals, but it also means building up our social networks. Now, we were talking before the presentation started, that there's probably a lot of networks that exist, people who know their neighbors and know them well enough to call on them in an emergency. My immediate next door neighbor to the east, I have that relationship. I have his contact information, he has mine. We're always communicating, sharing things. It's not formalized in anything. I'm going to tell him, I'm going to say, look, we did this emergency preparedness thing. I want to be explicit about it, is that, I know you would come to me in an emergency, and I would come to you, but let's be aware that, we may have to do that in a more substantial way than we've done in the past. Now, across the street from me, there are two new families. One I've met, and I have their contact information, but I need to strengthen that relationship. And the other family has just moved in, I've not met them yet, so I need to reach out to them also. So that's my example in my neighborhood. At the family level, I'm very fortunate that, I live with Adrienne, my wife, during the pandemic. I don't know what I would have done if I was alone, because having someone to talk to and having another person reaching out for information was invaluable. I don't know how people who live alone do it. That would be very difficult, I think, for a lot of us, and it would be for me, I know. So building those networks is very important. That's probably the key thing, the social resilience. And again, resilience is about prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. These are the key steps. And if we put this in place, we can sleep a little more easier at night. This hierarchy, again, I looked at this and I kind of did a little exercise. I said, well, during the pandemic, how much help did I get from these different levels, right? I sort of thought about it and I said, well, global level, I got information, that had some value, but information sources were available to me. Regional, if that means what did the United States, Canada, and Mexico do? I don't really know. Maybe there was something. I don't know that it affected me individually. Non-governmental organizations, I was struggling to kind of come up with something that directly benefited me. National government, yeah, it was, there was some miscommunication, bad information in the beginning, but, pandemics are very unpredictable and unknown. And, I'm just thankful that we got the vaccine as quickly as we can. And then there were other things too. So that was, I think I feel positive about that generally. Local government, I struggle to come up with something. Community, much more examples of how the community supported me individually in my household during the pandemic. And then my own household, that was a strength for me. And as an individual, I think it's important that we take care of ourselves. Self-care is a very important thing. It sounds trite. People say, oh yeah, that's all well and good. But there are many people whose heart is in the right place, who want to do good, who are out there working, and they don't take care of their own physical, mental, and emotional health. And in an emergency, they're either not available or not their best selves. So it's very important to take care of yourself. I think, again, it just sounds like a cliche, but that's where it starts. If we're not strong and healthy ourselves, we can't help ourselves and help other people in our family and our community. So I apologize for preaching on that subject, but I think that's really what is most important here. Now, when I saw this graphic, I said, and remember, I stepped in a couple of days ago. I said I looked at this thing and I said, I'm a bit of a graphics nerd, but this is like, wow, what the heck is this? So I looked at it a little bit and then I said, I'm just going to call Erin up and I say, Erin, walk me through this. And this was prepared by a group called Urban Preppers. Now, I don't know them, so I can criticize their graphic skills. They need work on their graphics, okay? But I commend them for doing it because once Erin walked me through it, I said, there's a lot of valuable information here and it's simpler than it looks, so bear with me. On the left-hand side, prepping categories. These are simply the things that you would need to have, in your home, in your go bag, that you carry with you, or where you work or go to school or some other off-site location where you might be, where you could stash stuff, okay? And then the box below that on the left, preparedness levels. What are you preparing for? So 72 hours is kind of a generally accepted time frame to prepare for. If you feel you should prepare for longer, that's fine, but that's kind of the short-term evacuation time frame. So you can use it to think, how much water do I need, how much food do I need, et cetera. Then in the 3 places that we're planning for, home, on the move, where you work, where you go to school, some other off-site location. And below that, the severity of the emergency that you're preparing for. Short-term evacuation, that could be the 72-hour time frame. Long-term evacuation, that could be weeks or months. I mean, you can establish this yourself when you're preparing. And then I'm never coming home. These people just love the abbreviations. They call this INCH, I'm never coming home. I like that. But I think we've all thought about that, like who would you go live with if you couldn't live in your house? And there were a lot of people after Superstorm Sandy and places like Katrina who couldn't go home for a long time. And they had to live with friends, relatives, or some other place. So, it's something to think about too. I think a lot of people would have an idea, but it could happen. Okay, so everyday carry bag. So I'm going to walk you through the list of what these things are pretty quickly, okay? So, and I will tell you what's in my bag. I'm not going to show you. I was going to do like a show and tell, but I don't want to get carried away here. And so, by the way, I use this backpack after every major event, after 9/11. After the blackout in 05, 06, I forgot the exact year. After Sandy, okay, after Isaias, I started carrying it again. And then as the days and weeks go by, I don't need to carry it, going there, I don't need that, I don't, And now because, and I was starting to focus on it when I got hurricane warnings from different sources and everything, and then particularly when I was invited to speak, I said, I better up my game. I better start carrying the backpack again, okay? So I use this like when I travel also. So it's got things in it like a inflatable pillow that you sleep on an airplane. And I don't like to take things out of this because I don't want to keep packing it and unpacking it, but I don't want to have a separate go bag. I'm talking about me. This is an example of what I do, but you may have to go through a similar process. So should I take out the inflatable pillow? I said, if I had to sleep here in the library or at the high school or something like that, that might not be a bad thing to have with me. It's not on the list, but, that's where the thought process goes. Okay, so number 1 is water. That's critical. You need water, and if you need it in your go bag for 72 hours, you need enough water for 3 days, right? Because you may not have access to clean water. Number 2 is your phone and charging cable. Solar powered in this case. Good thing to have. Coincidentally, I bought one of those, a little bit more robust one than my wife Adrian has. And I did that before I knew I was speaking here, so I'm just kind of bragging a little bit about that. Number 4 is a hygiene kit, wet wipes, tissues, hand sanitizer, handkerchief, whatever you need, for kind of basic sanitary. Your wallet. Now, most of us, when we go out, we take our phone, we take our keys, we take our wallet, but your wallet needs to have identification and certain other things in it. So that's important. Band-aids, or Erin says upgrade to a individual first aid kit. They're little small kits. I actually have one in here. It's probably not very good. I should go through it and see if it's really, a good kit, but that's a good thing to have. Pads, these are just like, first aid or something to wipe with. Reusable shopping bag. I actually have one of these. Someone gave me as a gift. Really a useful thing to have. It's nylon. It folds up into something like the size of my fist, and it's a pretty useful thing. If I didn't have one, I probably wouldn't appreciate it. Notepads, very old school, but you have no power. Notepad, I think most people still know how to write, at least of a certain age. Number 12 is pepper spray and a keychain alarm. So I guess this is for self-defense. Number 13 is a folding knife. That's, again, I can't carry it when I go on an airplane, but that's probably something, I don't know how I'm going to handle that. If I don't want to have 2 bags, but a knife is good to have. Number 10 is a multi-tool. That could be a useful thing if you know how to use tools, but if you have arthritis and you can't turn a screwdriver or something, it's not useful to you. But maybe you should carry it because there might be someone else who can use it, and if you have it, that could be a benefit to you and that person who's in your resilient community, if you will. Number 14 is a Paracord Bracelet. I had to ask Erin, what is that? So it's cord that's wrapped up in a bracelet form, and this is what you could use if you're not like an emergency responder, like my friends from that AMC course who are carrying 50 feet of rope with them. But that could be a useful thing too. A small flashlight, eating utensils. Number 17 is a small tin that could have various things in it, like duct tape, safety pins, a USB drive, tweezers, whistle, rubber bands, earplugs, a ferro rod and striker to, if you don't have another way of making a fire. 18 is snacks, candles, and gums. So, some of these things you say, I'm not going to carry that. I never use that, but that's right. You should look at what's important to you. So, and also on these other sites that I showed, they'll give various advice, but you have to decide what's important to you. So I'm always puzzled if we have a hurricane warning, you're going to hear all over the news, people are stocking up on milk, eggs, and bread, okay? And that immediately makes me think of French toast. And I said, why are people making French toast during an emergency? Am I missing something here? So I've not done that. I like to have bread on hand and maybe milk, but I don't really eat eggs. Do I really have to have them? I don't know. I've never gotten a good answer on that. So if someone knows why I need to have that other than make French toast, which I do like, but I don't consider it an emergency supply, let me know. So now for the 72-hour survival kit, right? This is a little bit more robust. You need more of a lot of the things that you might carry with you. And it's got things in it like cash, which is probably also good to have in your go bag. There are various things. Do we need a tent? I don't know. A Mylar blanket, could be small and easy to carry. I'm just scanning this to see if there are any other things that are not just more of. You might need to carry things like, toilet paper, clothing. You might want to carry with you too, some type of clothing. Change it when the weather changes. So it's kind of more, but you're thinking of the 72-hour time frame or whatever you determine is a time frame that you feel you should have supplies for. Shelter in place. This is, you can stay in your home, but you maybe don't have power, okay, for example. So water is key. I'll tell you another story that after one of the emergencies that I mentioned before, I bought a liner for my bathtub. that I could fill up with water, right? So I thought that was a pretty good thing to have. It didn't really cost very much. And so I could fill the bathtub up, this liner would be sanitary, and I would have potable water, a lot of potable water, a bathtub full. Well, we renovated our bathroom a few years ago. Now we don't have a bathtub, we just have a really nice shower. So I don't have that. I've got to come up with a different plan. Food. One of the things I discovered, it might have been on the FEMA website. I didn't know this. It's that it's recommended that if there's a hurricane warning or you anticipate some emergency, turn your refrigerator up to the coldest setting. Okay, you don't typically do that, but that way and also minimize the amount of times you would actually open the door, and that'll preserve the food longer. So there are little things on those information sites that could be useful. Obviously, we know about filling up our vehicles with fuel and generator tanks, et cetera. We can, if we can't cook inside, we don't have gas or electric, we might be able to cook out on our grill or something like that if we have propane or charcoal or something like that. My cousins down in Alabama and Florida, they're often impacted by hurricanes, but they can always cook outside because it's never cold enough to prevent that. We don't have that luxury. More supplies for personal hygiene, and Aaron gave me a good suggestion. He said, that this sounds like a lot of money. I have to buy all this stuff at once. Well, if you want to and you can, do it. But his suggestion was each time you go shopping, buy an extra one of and start building up your shelter-in-place stock. So that's a practical way to do it. And then medications, et cetera. This says have $1,000 in cash ready to go. Well, I don't know who the audience is for this, but I don't think a lot of people can do that. But cash on hand could be a useful thing to have. So again, you've seen this slide before, but Erin put it in again, and I think it's important to kind of wrap up with this message again. Particularly you here, but anyone else that you know who couldn't come or is the type of person that can, do more than just take care of themselves, is participating with people in the community, organizations in the community, to build up our environmental resilience. It's very important, not just for emergency preparedness, but for, building a sustainable and healthy community. The economic resilience, let's think seriously about this and help the local businesses stay in business and help local, tradespeople and working people be able to enjoy this community. And that touches on a whole range of subjects like, things like affordable housing. If this is not affordable community, we're going to be a community of people that only know how to do things with money. And money may not be the thing that can help us in an emergency. So it's all connected. And most importantly, our social resilience. So let's start with ourselves, start with our household, but reach out to your friends and neighbors and people in the community, so we can be stronger as a community. And I think that's really what we need to do. So again, I want to thank David, Jeff, Transition Town, Margaret. I mean, this is something that I've really got much more involved in the last few years because I've realized that, we can't just depend upon laws getting passed in Albany or Washington to solve all of our problems. We have to do it together. The more independent we are, the more safe and secure we'll be, us and our families. So I want to thank you all very much. And if there are any questions, I'm glad to field them and either answer them or throw them to someone who can.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Paul. Round of applause for Paul Merkelson for stepping in here. So I'll just mention again, you provided us with a lot of very useful, practical information. There's obviously the websites that you mentioned there. So please, again, help yourself to those resources in the back. We probably do have some overlap of information with what we've provided, but I think in this case, I think extra information is better than not enough information. So, and I think this is obviously for some of us just sort of a start to look at where we're at, what we may have on hand, what we've been thinking about. But one question I have, I think, is we have all been through. Well, not everybody has been through Superstorm Sandy, but I would say many of us here in this town have been through that. and have now been through, a couple of years of a pandemic. So I've actually had some real life lessons in terms of what that is actually like, what that experience is like. And I think for the most of us, that's changed how we look at things. Some things are more important now and other things not as much. So in terms of those real life lessons, what do you feel are some of the takeaways over the last, several years that we can now apply to being prepared for future disasters?
Well, I think as Americans, we have very short-term memories. And, it's easy, I use myself as an example. I don't carry the backpack all the time anymore. I was much more diligent about it when the memory of the disaster was much more, recent. So we need to kind of overcome that and just build our knowledge, our skills, and our abilities and prepare it. And once we're prepared, then we can, sleep easy, as I say. We've done what we need to do. We know who to call. We know what we do in a certain emergency, and that better prepares us. Now, there could be things that happen that we can't envision, right? A number of years ago, I had this discussion with someone, and because this comes up periodically anyway, and I said, we're on an island. Like, what if we can't get off the island, right? So we really need to be secure as an island, right? What if we're connected by bridges, right? So the guy was talking, he goes, I know a guy with a boat. And I said, would he take me? He says, well, I don't know, it's like, the boat's not that big and everything, but he's got an out, he can get to Connecticut, right? So, but after that conversation, it faded from my memory, right? Because it's not an immediate concern. Obviously, if you lived on like Block Island or some smaller island like that, that could be a bigger issue. Okay, so it's hard. I'm just bringing this up to say it's hard to envision and plan for everything because the unknown, the pandemic to many people was a complete unknown, right? And I was telling Margaret before, I said that I've done some reading about pandemics over the years. I just found it interesting, but I never really focused on how it would immediately affect me, right? It was just more like kind of a overview of it and a little bit of the medical and biology of it. But it was a shock to me about what we had to do and how we had to live through that. I was no more prepared for. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, one of the things I think about living in Port Washington is that it is a peninsula. They do construction on one of our main roads and forget about it. It's really difficult to get around town. So I think the idea of knowing where you live and what circumstances that creates is much more of a shelter in place. This is not really a place we're going to be evacuated from. It's there's not really a lot of easy way out unless, of course, you have a friend with a boat. So I think it's an important takeaway. I think that you really do need to prepare yourself, your house, your neighborhood for that potential reality that it's.
Yeah, I'm more concerned with being well prepared for, a week or two without power than I am having to evacuate Long Island. But you never know.
Again, if anybody else has any questions, feel free. Here we go.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. Talking about preparing our individual homes, what's your thought these days on generators? In our home, we only have oil. Generator seems like a major pain, especially when everybody in any sort of emergency is lining up at gas stations to try and refill them. And the resiliency efforts of PSEGLI seem to have been very effective. We really haven't suffered with outages for quite some time, at least in my house.
The thing that concerns me, just going back to that last comment of yours, is that it's still the same provider that provided poor service, very poor service during the last outages. So I don't personally have a lot of confidence in PSEG. But we'll see. I think they're better prepared to deal. But the whole point of this is that we need to have a backup plan, because sometimes they could be overwhelmed and not able to prepare. If they're better prepared, that's a good thing. But you know, we can't be totally dependent on outside service providers. Generators. So after Sandy, I got a standby generator, right? And I don't have central air conditioning, so it's only you know, 650 kilowatts. And but right now it's not working because I have to get it repaired, the pull crank. So because I'm on a small lot, at this time, my next door neighbor also got a standby generator, but he was able to locate it on his lot. So it's, you know, it's automatic. It comes on automatically. I have to go out and start it up. And, you know, if the weather is severe, that may not be such an easy thing to do, right? But I think it's a good thing to have if you can have it, because, you know, I can, again, have most of the power, all the power in my house running on the generator. And I have, you know, enough gas. I have several canisters that I could use. You can also connect it. I have not done this to your gas supply. But again, if that's out, you don't have that available to you. So there's no magic bullet. There's no one thing that's going to allow you to have your life go on as normal. But you know, I guess I'm somewhat of an advocate.
Large batteries that can help power your house, and solar panels. So on nice days, you can maybe get some quiet from the generator, because that's what drives me crazy. So there are alternatives, but
yeah, that's a good point. I think battery technology has really advanced quite a bit. And, you know, so again, there's no one size fits all. Some people would say, you know, it's worth the investment. You know, it's like insurance, right? I've run the generator in like 10 years once, and it was there was a power outage of an hour. So like after 20 minutes, I said, oh, this could go on for a while. Let me crank it up. But otherwise, you know, so it's like insurance. I spent a few $1,000s, and, you know, it's just for peace of mind, but I've got to get it working again.
One more question, Paul. So one of the other things that's mentioned in some of the material here is really having a means by which to meet up with other members of your family or friends, or to communicate. So I know that it's in some of this literature, but perhaps you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. I wish I had mentioned that, because it's really important, and it sort of sounds, it's something that's overlooked, and in some of the websites, I don't see that mentioned, but we were talking about this the other day. So you can't communicate with your immediate family or friends, or the people you want to get together. Well, what do? So what's recommended is to have a meeting place. To say, if we can't get in touch with each other, let's all meet under the big oak tree or whatever, okay? And that is I think a very important and practical and no-cost solution that you all know if you can't get in touch where you're going to meet, okay? So during the blackout, I had a kind of a funny experience where, you know, I was working on the 33rd floor of Citicorp Center in the city, and we had to walk down. And then and my poor secretary forgot to bring her pocketbook with her. I mean, and she just thought, well, I'm just going to take the elevator back up. It's only a short thing. Well, she couldn't go back up for that. That's another story. So I started walking generally in the direction of Penn Station, and I didn't have information. I didn't really know what was happening. So I'm trying to get information, but I noticed that Connolly's Bar, you know, I was passing by, and I said, you know, I got to do my part, and I know that without power, that beer is going to go warm. So I went into Connolly's and I had a beer. I did my part, and I felt good about that. I felt good because I had a beer. And then I continued walking to Penn Station, and going through Bryant Park, I saw someone with a radio, so I sat next to him. What's going on? There wasn't good information in the first hour afterwards. If you remember, this was like a regional blackout, right? And we weren't getting good or complete information. I said, let me continue to walk to Penn Station. If the trains are running, I can take the trains. And then by that time, as I got close, I realized that the trains weren't running and, I needed a plan B. And I'm walking down 34th Street and I feel this like cool blast of air. It was actually a nice day in September, I think. But this cool air came blowing out of Macy's and I said, wow. And the door was open and I saw people inside. So I went in. And then I was able to get in touch with my son, Eric, who was working downtown. It was like through Adrian. And I said, come to Macy's. We can hang out here for a while. So then some of the employees of Macy's were just letting anyone in, right? They were community minded, right? But some of them, like, Macy's has the fancy food thing in the basement, the cellar. The guys working down there, they wouldn't let us take food, right? He said, that would be looting. I said, this is an emergency, people need food. I didn't understand that. So anyway, Eric came up, we met. We ended up, some people were walking home, like walking back to Queens or wherever. I don't know if people walk to Long Island. We said, let's stay in place. Probably by tomorrow, there'll be a way to get home. So we went into the sportswear section. We got a couple of nice golf jackets, made some pillows, slept on the floor, right? There's no plan. That was just a practical way to do that. And, it was an interesting experience. And then the next day we were able to get home. So being able to meet up was like a really important thing, because I think Eric particularly, he was like 17 or 18 at the time, was less prepared, to be on his own in that kind of emergency maybe than I was, but I also felt more secure, being with him. So having a meeting place, right, is an important thing. And I think actually many companies kind of have that. They'll have like a rendezvous place. I even remember back when I was in school that when we had to do like a fire drill, there was a place that we went to. So we should do that as individuals too, that our friends and family, where are we going to meet if we can't get home and we can't communicate with each other, and again, I hadn't thought about that, and I think that was kind of a really good, important suggestion.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So I think as we start to wrap things up here, for those folks who perhaps don't have a go bag, don't have the carry items, what would be the main takeaway right now for them to think about? What would be step one?
Well, just start. You don't have to look at every website, but look at a few. Just build your knowledge about this subject of emergency preparedness, so you can, so it's not a shock and a completely new thing to you. I think that's the first thing to do. Just build up and then start accumulating things that you think are going to be important for you in like that, 72-hour period. What you carry with you. If you say, I'm not, I'm like Paul, I don't want to carry that bag all the time, okay? But what do you carry with you? What could you put in your car, that if you're stuck in an emergency? I think water is probably the most important thing, so put a couple of bottles of water in your trunk and get a bag and just do it a little bit at a time. Don't be overwhelmed by the subject, because the truth of the matter is you're doing a lot of this already, okay? If not for emergency preparedness, for convenience. So a lot of these things you already have. So don't be, intimidated. Say, it's too much to deal with. I can't deal with it. Do a little bit at a time. You're aware now. You came here, you zoomed in, whatever. So you're early adopters in a way, and you've probably done many of these things anyway. So do a little bit more. If you have the money, the energy, the focus to like really, make yourself much more hardened for, whatever comes, go for it. But I think the other thing too, and I wish I had said it first, is that establishing your network of support is important. Your family, household, friends and neighbors, because we're social animals. We haven't survived this far because of the opposable thumb or walking upright, okay, or because of our ability to build things and develop things and use resources. As a matter of fact, that's what's got us into a lot of trouble. But our advantage as a species is our social connections, our ability to work together. So take advantage of that, because we'll feel a lot more secure when we know there are other people that we can call on And we all want to give and help other people too. We feel, you know, I'll tell you one thing, like, and I kind of skipped over it, but Erin had emphasized it, of taking courses, of doing things. So years ago, the company I worked for had offered courses in CPR, and I'd taken it, but I've never done really a refresher. So, you know, in an emergency, I wouldn't feel confident in being able to help somebody. But I have the good intention of saying I should take, like we were talking before, that the Red Cross is going to be offering courses, you know, here in the community. So I have the good intention now of doing that, because I don't want to be in a position where someone needs my help and I can't give it. It would make me feel terrible. And you know, for lack of having a little more knowledge, you know, I could have helped somebody. So do that too if you can.
Terrific. Well, another round of applause for Paul Merkelson. Thank you so much, Paul.
And I'm just a pinch hitter.
Yeah, I want to, of course, thank David Jakeem, Margaret Galbraith, Erin Molyneux, and I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for taking the time to be here tonight, for those who joined us on Zoom. And I think your point about our social networks is a very important one. So if you did enjoy this program, if you got something out of it, if this is information you found valuable, share it with someone. I know we're going to be eventually getting this recording up as well as another way people can access this information. So thank you again, everybody, for being here, and I hope you have a terrific night.
Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.